This subunit, we will be talking about the vertebrates in the animal kingdom. The domain is still Eukarya. It is still the kingdom Animalia, but now, instead of the 8 phyla that belong to the invertebrates, we are going to be in the phylum Chordata, which include all of the vertebrates. These are organisms that have a spinal cord and vertebrae. And you can see here the 5 different classes of organisms that we're going to talk about. The first group that we're going to talk about are the fish, and we're not going to actually talk about them in classes because there are a couple classes within the fish group, and we're going to talk about them more as a whole group of fish. The 4 main characteristics of fish is that they have endoskeletons, gills, closed loop circulation, and kidneys. And you might be wondering why I'm calling them fishes. And the word fishes is proper when you are referring to a bunch of different species of fishes. So in the ocean, there are a ton of different fishes, etc. If you had a fish tank of only goldfish, then you would say they are all fish because they're the same species. So that's the main difference there. As you are writing these down, please make sure that you leave some space for all 3 endoskeleton, gills, and kidneys, because you will be writing a little bit with each of those. You don't have to write anything for this page, but one thing I want you to notice is that the characteristics of goldfish that is not universal to all fish are going to be the fins, right? Fins and scales. Notice that we talked about the endoskeleton, gills, closed loop circulation, and kidneys as characteristics of fish. Fins is not a characteristic of all fish, and so that's not something that we can put because not every fish has it. And same is said for scales. Not all fish are going to have scales, even though those are very common characteristics that we see. Next to where you wrote endoskeleton, please add that the endoskeleton is made of either cartilage or bone. This is a very important characteristic in fish and will help determine what type of fish we are looking at. Even though fins are not a characteristic of all fish, they do help, they are a common characteristic that helps fish increase their stability and movement in the water. So fins are their mode of locomotion and transport, and so they're going to help with movement and that kind of thing. And then the swim bladder, if you look, is right here in this fish. And a bladder is basically just a sac that is going to be filled with something, most likely a fluid. For us, our actual bladder is filled with urine, which is water and waste that we produce. In a fish, the swim bladder is going to be filled with gas that will allow them to move up and down vertically in the water. So they're going to be able to move and, go either up or down and adjust their buoyancy within the water that they are in. They have a sensory organ called the lateral line, and I would like you to just write down that the lateral line helps sense vibration in water. And the lateral line you can see on this catfish here is a line that runs along them, and it has these openings in the side of the fish. And what happens is when water comes in and hits that, it sends them signals, because these are nerve endings here, that tell them that something's near them. This is why if you've ever gone fishing, maybe your parent has told you that one of the keys to being a good fisherman or fisherwoman is that you are quiet, because when we talk, our sound is vibrations in the air, and those can be transmitted to the water. And if a fish senses that in the water through their lateral line, then they might get spooked and swim away. So this is going to help them to be able to see and sense the surroundings in the water. Gills are a very important feature of a fish. They are going to be their respiratory structure that allows them to exchange oxygen from the water. So we have lungs that pulls oxygen from the air. Fish are going to have gills that allow them to pull oxygen from the water. And what happens is the water moves into the mouth of the fish and then passes out the back of this thing here called the operculum. And these are all their gills here. And as the water passes over there, the gills are able to pull oxygen from that water and allow them to send it to their bloodstream to give them oxygen for their cells. One of the other key characteristics of fish that helps distinguish them from their invertebrate relatives prior to them is the kidney. And the kidney is the part of the excretory system, so this is going to allow different species the ability to filter waste and water from the blood. And this is another key characteristic that's going to be found in all vertebrates from now on that we didn't really see in prior species. And so this allows them to help get rid of the wastes that are consumed and taken in during normal function. The reproduction in fish is going to be sexual mostly, so they're going to reproduce sexually, and they're going to have external fertilization through a process called spawning. Because they live in the water, they're going to lay the eggs, and then the males will come by and fertilize the eggs externally from the female. On the next page, you will see the groups of fish, and there are going to be 3 groups of fish, so kind of space it out so you can write about the 3 different groups. The first group of fish are the jawless fish, and they are named such because they don't have a jaw. And they also are the only modern vertebrates without a backbone, so it's kind of contrary to call them vertebrates because they don't actually have a backbone. But they do belong to the chordate phylum because they have the spinal cord. And what's beneficial of them not having that backbone is they are able to kind of twist and turn a little bit more, which is helpful since they don't have a jaw. The hagfish, for example, which is right here, is a scavenger. It's going to feed off of different organisms that have fallen basically to the bottom of the ocean, and they kind of use their teeth and their body to dig into the carcass of a organism, and then they can use that flexibility because they don't have that spine to kind of whip themselves around, and they can actually tie themselves in a knot and use that as leverage to kind of whip that around to tear off chunks of flesh from the carcass. Lampreys tend to be more parasitic, but they have that kind of rough tongue and spines here again that they are going to dig into their food source with because they don't have a jaw. They don't have the ability to bite. They are going to be cartilaginous fish, so they have a skeleton that is made of cartilage, which separates them from some of the other groups. The second group of fish are the cartilaginous fishes, and they are going to include the sharks, skates, and rays. Rays are just kind of, skates are kind of ray-like. A lot of people wonder what those are. And then this also here is a cartilaginous fish, and the key characteristic that you need to know about them is that their skeleton is made of cartilage. And that's going to be beneficial for them because cartilage is a more flexible but durable material that's lightweight. So it allows them to be fast and stealthy in their hunting. The last group of fish are the bony fish, and bony fishes include puffer, perch, salmon, seahorse, almost any fish that you could really think about aside from those other 2 groups is going to be the bony fish. Most people are going to think of bony fish: tuna, salmon, bass, pike. Every fish that is, very common is a bony fish aside from like sharks and rays. And they're named bony fish because they have a skeleton made of bone. While they do have some cartilaginous pieces like we do, the primary structure of their skeleton is bone. There are 2 groups of bony fish that we're going to look at on the next slide. Bony fish can be divided into 2 groups, the ray-finned or the lobe-finned fish. And the ray-finned fish have fins that are more ray-like, so they kind of spread out and are going to help with their swimming in the water. Lobe-finned fish have fins that are lobed, so they're not as fanned out, and these are the ancestor of our amphibians. So the lobe-finned fish is the species that kind of helped the transition, or was the transition, to the amphibians, where we go from the tadpole to the frog or the salamander, etc. And lobefin fish, different lobefin fish, not this particular species, but have the ability to be on land because of the lobes, which are kind of like primitive legs. That is the end of our fish notes.